Welcome to Life Chapters, Money Choices, the podcast where we go beyond the numbers and into the stories that shape our lives and our finances as well. I'm Michael Avery, and today we're talking about something that affects more of us than I think we realize, the abrupt end of a career and the often unexpected beginning of a second one around midlife. My guest is Magnus Taljaard, a former executive who found himself retired ahead of schedule, but rather than slowing down, Magnus decided to reinvent himself as a financial planner, as a learner, and as a man with purpose. Well, together with Kim Potgieter, we're going to explore what happens when sometimes you're forced to exit before you're emotionally or practically ready, and how that moment of transition or even crisis can become a powerful catalyst for change, and even how one can do this in parallel while you're currently working to build out this next chapter of your life. So what does it take to reimagine your future in midlife? Magnus, great to have you on the podcast, and I think the obvious first place to start is tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Michael, I still don't know whether to call it retired or not, but let me say that it's kind of post my full-time corporate life for just over 2 years now. So if I go back over my career, I actually started at Standard Bank just over 30 years ago. My intention was always to stay for a couple of years and then go and find other things to do in the corporate world, but there was always something interesting. So I actually had my kind of 3 decades doing 6 or 7 different kinds of things at the bank. When we talk about, I think, the relevance for this kind of post-corporate world, I think I was very fortunate that I really enjoyed what I did. So I really enjoyed working, got a lot of satisfaction out of it, and also a lot of purpose, which meant when the time came for the transition, I think all these factors became very relevant to manage, as you started planning a different take on life.
You did start planning for it, though, so yours wasn't one of those, I've reached a situation where there is a retrenchment, say, or COVID happens, and now I have to pivot somewhere else. Yours was a little more structured. How long before you made the transition did you start thinking about this and what you needed to do in terms of building up tools or finding a plan and a structure to get you to that point?
I mean, I love reading. I'm very analytical, as Kim knows. But so probably mid-50s, I'd say. I started reading up about it. And what I found was, I think quite typically in my case, a lot of the focus was thinking about the financial side. So how do you kind of move into a world where you need to convert your assets into an income stream? So that was always the major focus. And then you started picking up that actually that's only part of the story. And this is quite a big deal in making this change. So I read up about it. I knew that this was something important to pay attention to. So I guess I started a analytical process, a theoretical process to try and orientate myself from this. But the one thing I'll just say at the outset is that it doesn't matter how long and hard you think about it. In practice, it remains a different thing. So I was actually taken by surprise that despite the level and detail I went into thinking about this and kind of trying to unpack and understand what do I get from my work and how do I replicate this in a new environment and so on, when it came to the point of actually making the transition, it was still quite a significant adjustment. So one of the things that I've been saying to kind of friends and colleagues of mine is you really should try and move out of the theory into the practice early on. And it's going to be different for different people. But, if you want to continue working, I think start identifying what that means for you. If, like I think is often the case, work has taken up so much of your life and given you so many aspects of it, and you've perhaps neglected other interests and hobbies and these kind of things, don't leave it to the point where you actually in a bit of a vacuum before you start thinking about it.
Are you being held captive by that identity that helped shape your corporate life? And don't underestimate, Kim, the importance of that psychologically when you're trying to build up a next chapter. When did you first meet Magnus?
Well, he'd actually read my book. So it was 2 phases. He'd read my book and he had lots of post-its because he is very analytical. He'd also been studying his postgraduate in financial planning, and 2 of the planners from Chartered had done a lecture at Stellenbosch University and he'd attended that. So I think for him it was aha twice. He read the book. He now heard about these these different planners and the way they were speaking about what they did. So he came and went through our full process in order to give himself a second opinion about whether he was on track or what changes he needed to make.
And listening to Magnus's story, is this something that resonates with many of your clients when you sit down and engage them about how to build out? I mean, he's in a very fortunate position in that he's got enough, but he's now looking to give back. And how does one sustain that kind of success in life in chapter 2 or 3?
Well, I think, and what he said is so accurate in the sense that many people think about it in their head. So there's a whole lot that goes on. But how many people actually go and do the stuff? And the common thing that I hear from people over and over when I try and have these discussions with them, I'll do it when the time comes. I haven't got time now. I haven't got time. I'm too busy working. I can't give it my full attention. I'm going to take a year sabbatical, and in my year sabbatical, I'm going to work on it. And I go, no, please don't do that. Please start thinking about it. Please give yourself the gift of putting aside some of your time to work on it instead of waiting until that year sabbatical that you think you're going to give yourself. Because often that year sabbatical that you're going to give yourself is a bit too late to be doing all this work. And I think that's what Magnus is saying as well.
How did you find that, the question of identity and then having to rebuild that identity after leaving corporate, Magnus? And what were the kinds of issues that you grappled with that you say you perhaps would have wanted to start immersing yourself with from a practical level earlier on?
The question of identity is actually a great example of the theory and practice, because whenever I read the theory and I came to the part about identity, I thought, but I don't identify myself as, being this kind of corporate executive, anything like that. So I don't think that's really important. So I didn't actually pay any attention to it. What I was focusing on, which I think are also important things, was, what I get from work in terms of purpose and meaning, the kind of interaction with people, the kind of challenge and satisfaction of working, and all those kind of things. I thought, well, that's probably what I should focus on quite a lot. But it did surprise me. So when I stopped working, first of all, the question, when people ask you what you do, you kind of stumped in a way, because it sounds like I need to spend 5 minutes explaining what I'm doing, because there are lots of things that I'm doing. But what is it? What are you doing? I mean, describing yourself as being retired or anything like that just doesn't resonate with me at all. So then I realized, but actually maybe there is a bit of a vacuum there around, how do I actually fundamentally think about myself in a shorthand sense? So that took some getting used to. Aligned with that was, I also underestimated, we are so conditioned, through decades of work. Every day there's a conveyor belt, there's a momentum, you've got meetings, you've got things to do, you actually stop thinking about it. So kind of your day is defined for you, a structure, etc. Now you have this wonderful gift of freedom of choice and time and so on, which is a wonderful thing, but it also is actually quite challenging. So I found myself, when I did have the luxury on a Friday morning, because I then went into 4 days a week, on a Friday morning, I actually felt completely guilty, because everybody else is going to work. I should be a productive citizen. Why am I not being productive at this particular point in time? And I found myself actually even hesitating. I love reading as an example. So I found myself, I would read non-fiction during the day, not fiction, because that felt like slacking off. So silly things like that you never expect it, but you have to kind of uncondition.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
It,
You write in your book, Kim, that Peter Drucker, the famous management consultant, he writes that, this idea is a lot more common today in a world where we're not laborers, we're knowledge workers. And so you don't burn out, or you're not kind of spent at 60 or 50 or even up. I work with Jeremy Sampson. He's well into his 80s as the brand father, absolutely loves what he does, but it is a core part of his identity as well. I need to ask him if he's thought about what he would do outside of that kind of work. It's fascinating.
But I think also when we're looking at all of this, we actually be getting more wisdom. So as the time's going on, we are growing in wisdom, which in past work, it was physical and your body was getting tired. And that's why we need to rethink it. And I think like rethinking what you're going to do, and if you are working up until your 80s, I think that is incredible, as long as what you're doing is something that you enjoy doing. So I always say, if what you're earning is a paycheck and not a paycheck, why stop working? But then if you can be doing it in a sense of, we don't want to overuse this word balance, but if you can be doing it and other things. So my magic word is always and, working and going on trips and looking after your learning and spending time with your family. Because that kind of way of thinking is also completely different, because we've always been in these silos. It was all studying, then all working, then all leisure. And now this portfolio life is really around, let's have a little bit of everything. And that way, I think we're so much better positioned to be able to maybe describe what our identity is and not feel like we've lost a whole part of it.
But Kim, you've touched on something so important that I want to build on there, because often when I chat to financial planners and we talk retirement, it's a life phase kind of approach. And, you're in your asset accumulation phase, and then you retire, and then that's supposed to be like a leisure. And there isn't the subtle nuance and discussion about, well, yes, you may have accumulated enough assets, but, what is it that's going to get you out of bed every morning to give your life that kind of purpose and play check? So I want you to can you build on that idea of how does one go about thinking about building a portfolio life? Where does one even start?
So one of the exercises that Magnus and I did together, and it might be one worth mentioning, was this concept of success to significance.
Right.
So it's not developed by me. It's from Thomas Hardy years and years ago. And what it is how do we start a parallel life? So the place to start is, what am I trying to achieve? What will the next chapter look like if it turns out well? And then to go, well, what are some of these parallel changes that I need to be making? And to actually identify areas that you want to be involved in, instead of just doing life because that's what you've been doing. And I think we're so used to being on a hamster wheel, and we're so used to just going and going and going, that very few of us stand back and actually look in on our lives and go, I want to work out what it is I want to be doing. I just don't want to carry on doing it. There's the Stephen Covey, working out what's important and what's urgent. We stay working in this urgent place. We don't come out and say what's important. So for me, like that standing back, looking in my life and saying what is important that I keep and actually what I need to edit out. So for me, that would be how I would go about doing the process. And it was much like we did together, Magnus and I.
Now, Magnus, maybe you can take me through that process. Did you then dedicate an hour or two a day to step back, to say, if I'm going to edit my life, like we edit podcasts and we say, well, that was a really good bit and we're going to take that out, and you've got to block book that time in the diary. Were you very intentional and conscious about how you went about putting that into practice?
I realized I had to. So as Kim said, if you don't carve out the time, you don't do it justice at all. So it was important to do that. However, the balance is also, I think, quite key. Perhaps being very analytical, I find myself, if you get almost too deeply involved with it, you don't want to start obsessing about this. You don't want to start thinking that you need to figure this out on paper.
Right.
And have a plan that's going to now serve you for the next 20 years. And something I had to get used to was a lot more of an experimental mindset. So you start with the things that you value. So what are the things that are really important to you? You focus on your interests and so on. But I think then actually saying, well, I don't know if this is going to work out well, but I don't necessarily have to. So it's almost more like a startup mentality where you're saying, listen, I'm going to do enough work to figure out if this is something I think could have value for me, and then try it out.
Yeah.
So I did that. The studies that Kim referred to, I've always been very interested in kind of personal financial planning, and leading up to now and needing to think about this in real terms, I thought it'd be really great to do the course and complete the studies and so on. And I really, really enjoyed that. The experimental part is, well, could it lead to something? So my other big passion, also my career before me, is digital. So the kind of combination of digital and financial planning was a potential overlap. I didn't know what that meant in practice, but I thought this could be, something really interesting to explore. And I think that exploration is still ongoing. So that was kind of something completely new. On the other hand, I guess building on my corporate side, there was opportunities to get involved in consulting. So there you're leveraging perhaps more of the traditional work that I've been involved in so far. Actually, if I reflect now on the couple of years, I'm not sure I had a grand plan thus far. And then I thought, actually, well, hang on. Now, if I think about my corporate career, I'm not sure there was a grand plan there either. And I think sometimes we mistakenly think that somehow I think some people do it, but I think most people actually end up finding their way, and you kind of get involved in things, you experiment, etc.
Yeah. In corporate speak, they say opportunity drives strategy. So you may have this strategy and all of a sudden an asset comes on the market that you weren't thinking of, and you go out and you acquire it, and it takes you into a new market altogether. We're chatting to the CEO of Vukile Property Fund, Lawrence Rapp, about exactly how they found themselves in Iberia. It was one of those chance conversations with Mark Wayner over coffee 9 years ago in Rosebank. But I like what you pointed to there about not over planning, and as you say, most people probably don't hit that sweet spot. But you've got to have some kind of minimum viable product, to use that startup speak, don't you? To say, right, well, there's enough there for me to go out and explore, but you've got to avoid the analysis paralysis.
Yes, and that for me is particularly important, because I have developed so much admiration for the team that worked with me at Chartered Wealth, because I like to get into the detail, but you realize that the paralysis side is very real. So it's so important to be able to stand back and zoom out and actually look at the bigger picture. And I think that's where actually a trusted advisor can be extremely valuable, because there's no substitute for bouncing it off somebody else.
Is this a male-female thing, Kim? Do you find that men like to analyze or over-analyze more, or is it just an individual personality?
I think it's a personality.
Yeah.
As I've chatted to you before, I always like to look at the personality. But when you have this analytical male or female, you need to have somebody that can actually challenge your thinking. But I think where Magnus, it was so good, and what we need to look at is he's remain curious. And that for me is often the biggest skill that you need to have when you're doing this. You don't have it all mapped out, but the worst thing we can possibly do is just not go and try new things. So, I'll give you a story of another client, and this is an example of playing tennis. I was having a life planning meeting with her, and we were talking about what she was going to do in the next chapter. And she said, all I would really love to do is to play tennis. And but if I went to play tennis at my age, who wants to play tennis with me? And why would they be playing tennis with me? And then I went and I just said to her, well, what's the worst thing that can happen? You can go there, nobody can play with you, and then never touch tennis again. Or you could go there and find that somebody did want to play with you. Fast forward, and I think she's now 10 years into this period, and her husband always teases me when he sees me, and he said, if you could only just bring Kathy home, because she's always at tennis now. And this is the whole thing about having this different kind of mindset, where we actually have not this fixed mindset, but much more of an open mindset, where we will go and try new things, try it out, see if we enjoy it, see if it adds value to us. If it doesn't, we don't carry it on, but at least we bring it in. And I think with Magnus, maybe he's not ever going to be a financial planner, but what he did is he went and he studied it, he learned about it, he kept himself curious about it. He now might add it to another skill he's got of wisdom that he accumulated throughout his career. But he's gone and he's tried it out and he's seen. My worst is when people are just sitting back and going, you know what, I could have, I should have, but they're not actually doing it.
If only, could have, would have. That is living with regret. And that's ultimately where you don't want to find yourself, not having taken that chance or that shot. Do you think it reduces the fear around not having enough when income streams feel more fluid? If you've got this more variable mindset, a mindset that isn't as fixed on one particular target or one particular outcome, how does one develop that? Because again, back to personality types, I think what you're describing, that curiosity, may not be innate or natural to most people.
No, it really isn't. And that's why I think it's so good to have someone that supports you. It could be your spouse, it could be your financial planner, it could be a coach, but having somebody supporting you so that you don't feel alone in making all of these big decisions, because you need to be brave. Let me just share that going into this next transition, there's nothing about it that doesn't call for you, first of all, the feeling is that you're going to, when we talk about identity, you're feeling vulnerable because this is new. This is uncomfortable. You're needing to take chances, and sometimes maybe those chances aren't going to pay off. So yes, I definitely think having a support group around you. So identifying like maybe some important people that can support you. And for everybody that might be different, to keep your confidence at the level that you need it to be. Because I think what I do see happening sometimes is people lose their confidence. And when they lose their confidence, they won't try anything. Then all of a sudden the world becomes quite small, and all of a sudden they're not so curious to try new things. And for me, that's always sad, and that's what I'm always trying to get people to encourage them before. know who your support group's going to be and call on them, ask for help.
And don't be afraid of failing, because, that fear will erode that confidence, to your point, Kim. So, Magnus, I mean, if you could give advice to someone who's listening, still inside the corporate machine on that hamster wheel at the moment, but curious about what comes next, from your experience, what advice would you give them on how to approach developing this kind of curiosity and mindset, and without fearing the potential of a best laid plan coming to naught?
I do think there's value in exposing yourself to the kind of research and the literature and talking to people that are expert in this beforehand, because there's a lot of information out there. And again, the best time to start understanding that, immersing yourself into it, is when you actually still on that curve. So Kim also uses the second curve analogy, where you, let's say in your career, you're kind of still at the peak of your career, and then eventually this is going to start going down and it's time going to be for the next curve. Now, if you can start that investigation when you're still on the curve, it doesn't feel like it's the best time to do it because you're so busy, there's no time, etc. But actually that's exactly when you need to do it, because your sense of confidence, just the resources you have around you, actually makes it the best time possible to start finding out about it. But I say, if you can turn that into something practical. So if you can start your experiments, whether that's an experiment with a hobby or starting to play tennis, or actually starting a part-time job, if you want to start doing coaching, maybe start taking a course or doing something like that. But don't leave it until you've actually left your previous career.
Yeah, it almost sounds like the sportsman, the rugby player. I'm thinking here of Malcolm Marx and Stephen Kitsoff starting their beer brand, but they waited until they were towards the back end of their careers, but you could say still at the top, double World Cup winners. But they knew it was coming to an end. Lifespan of a professional rugby player is generally about mid-30s, and they had the resources, they had the public glare on them, and they started building at that moment. Kim, how do you help clients begin the parallel planning that Magnus describes, the testing, the hobbies, the interests, all those new identities before a hard retirement date?
So I conduct a lot of workshops. People come to the workshops where we actually start the process when they're much younger. But for me, it's when they've got the intention. So they actually, normally people come looking for me. They might buy one or two of my books, either Retirement or Midlife Money Makeover. It starts getting them curious about it. And then we can start having those real conversations. And often a lot of the things we talk about, they're not ready for, but we plant seeds. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. We need to plant seeds and let them develop. Because if we don't, that period of actually being in the retirement, losing a lot of our connections, it's then so much harder. We're having to work double hard to get where we've got to go. Whereas if we're prepared to do some parallel work, we're prepared to, in a way, say that we're important and our jobs are important, then I think we can just move forward a lot more positively than actually challenging. We don't want to be upstream swimmers.
Yeah, and I think it does start, though, with having the open mind. I mean, because you're dealing with people who've picked up a book or two, they've done their own research, a bit of their own due diligence, and they're thinking about this. They're in a much more receptive space. So if you're not in that space, hopefully listening to this conversation will help open that mind a little bit to getting to that point. Because
so many of us, and I just need to stress this point, we don't see ourselves as older. So when you look around, you're still thinking you're in your 20s and 30s, and we all know retirement's coming. We all know there are these ages when people aren't going to need us as much as they did before. But what I find is we dig our head in the sand and we pretend it's not going to be us. It's going to be somebody else. It's not going to be us. And I think the stories that I see as the most successful are the people that are prepared to just embrace that change is coming and accept that change is coming and get into the driving seat of their own change instead of leaving it to what other people do to them. It's actually what they're choosing for their lives.
Magnus, as we reach the end of our time, what is the one thing that's really surprised you most about this process and this journey that you've been on? If you were to reflect on where you started and where you find yourself today here in my Parkview studio.
There are actually quite a few things, to be honest, but perhaps the piece that I would highlight is the sense of purpose and direction, and perhaps it is aligned to this whole concept of identity. because a lot of the things that I focused on when I planned for this was, we talk about meaning, etc. So there's a lot on the significance of what your life means and what that means in terms of giving back, the contributions you want to make, the time you want to spend with your family and friends, your health, all those kind of key focuses. And I knew that the satisfaction part of working was, and the challenge was something that I really wanted to replicate. But there's something about that purpose, sense of direction, where you've got, when you think about the future, you've got big plans, you've got dreams, you've got ideas. And somehow I didn't think I would miss that part as much when I entered this new phase. And that kind of led me down the investigation of, when you talk about purpose, is it this one overriding big P purpose that kind of needs to be with your entire life? Or do you actually recreate that in various different kinds of things that you do? And I think that's at the point where I'm right now. But there's something really important. And I think it's perhaps because retirement is associated with ending something. So if you don't put something else in its place, it's going to feel like, well, you've not climbed up this hill. You didn't stop thinking about it. Now you're at the top. And the only way is down on the other side. And what is it actually that's going to keep on driving you and motivating you and having that kind of sense of hope for the future? So that for me was a neglected part of my preparations.
Yeah. Would you say, Kim, it's about goal setting as well? And it's interesting listening to Magnus say that direction was one of the things that surprised him about what he had lost most. And how do you recapture, what that big P is, or maybe a bunch of small P's? Is that something we need to really get into the mindset to do, to start thinking about goal setting in retirement without, again, being overly structured about how we think about redefining what that next P is?
So I believe it's intention setting. Because what we don't want to be doing is wasting our time doing things that we didn't really want to do in the first place. So if we can have these intentions of what we want to do and keep resetting them, because it's not just a once-off process. For me, this is a yearly process where you look at it like, for my year coming up, what are the things that my time, and I think the big thing that happens to all of us is the time starts getting in our heads less and less that we've got. So we should be using it more wisely. So if we can set the goals, we can set the intentions so that we're making sure that the time we've got, we actually are doing what is bringing us meaning and adding value to other people.
But on the other side of that, I know time is logarithmic in the way we experience it. So it's just the natural order of things. We actually do have more time, though, in retirement, because we're not bound to this corporate 9 to 5 anymore.
All of a sudden, we can share our time. So we all have 168 hours a week. That's a definite, that we all get. We might have different money, but we have this 168 hours. So I like to work with clients that they put routine to that they start doing things that are really important in that time. And yes, we might have more time, but the amount of people that I chat to that go, I don't know how I ever worked because my time just seems to be taken up. But I often do challenge them and go, how much of that time is being taken up by things you actually want to do, and how much of it has just been taken up with keeping yourself busy. So again, is real conversations that you're having with yourself. It's not about just keeping yourself busy. It's around actually engaging in things that bring you meaning, and as Magnus is saying, bring you purpose.
I've got to say, it's been a fantastic conversation chatting to you both. And it shows you, I think, how many blind spots we do have that I had going into this conversation about things that I wouldn't have thought about, around being a lot more aware of my purpose and being intentional about understanding how I'm going to recreate that purpose in a second chapter, because so much of it right now for me, Michael Avery, is defined in, financial journalist, broadcaster, conference facilitator, MC. I'm on the treadwheel. I haven't really been able to zoom out yet, Kim, so I think you and I need to have a personal session as well in the not too distant future. But for anyone looking to get real insight into these issues, Midlife Money Makeover by Kim Potgieter is actually on my desk here, and there were some really good insights that I drew for this podcast from the book around building a parallel life, around the questions of identity, asking yourself, what does your ideal day look like? I think it's a great place to start. So thank you very much to Kim Potgieter as always, and Magnus Taljaard, thank you very much. Powerful reminder that life doesn't follow our timelines, and sometimes the best chapters are the ones we didn't expect to write. Well, whether you're approaching retirement, you're rethinking your career, or just wondering what's next, remember, it's never too late to start again, and it's always worth planning with purpose If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who's standing at their own crossroad. Subscribe to Life Chapters Money Choices and join us as we keep telling the human stories behind our financial lives. Until next time, I'm Michael Avery. Thanks for listening.